Hey, true crime fans, welcome back to For Criming Out Loud and our bedtime series called Crime Me to Sleep. We've been reading Buried Beneath the Boarding House, and this is the final episode, episode 15. So if you're new here, make sure you subscribe and go into the playlist section so you can start the book from the beginning if you like this episode. Let's get into episode 15, the final episode of Buried Beneath the Boarding House. The Trials of Dorothea Puente. The Sacramento police took charge of Dorothea on the runway, leading her directly to Sacramento County Jail, where she was booked in promptly. It was only here that her property was searched and documented, and the $3,000 that she had left over from her escape attempt was discovered in her bulging purse. That very same morning, she was brought before the court to meet her appointed lawyers, Peter Vlotton and Kevin Climo, the men who had been given the onerous task of keeping Dorothea Puente, known around the world as a mass murderer, out of jail. There was a session of court lasting only 7 minutes, during which Dorothea was arraigned without bail for one count of murder. Bert Montoya, the man whom she thought nobody cared about, had brought the full weight of justice down on her. In jail, Dorothea enjoyed none of the companionship that she was accustomed to in prison. The whole world knew about her crimes, and people couldn't meet her eye. She had nobody to tell her stories to, except for her lawyers, and lying to them just got her rolled eyes and sighs. The police were taking months to piece together the case that the prosecution were going to use to pin every death on Dorothea, but they were being exceptionally thorough about it. Every lie that she told would be another nail in her coffin as far as the defense were concerned. They had no way of knowing just how much of Dorothea's history had already been uncovered. So every time she spun one of her tall tales, and it was disproved, it ruined her credibility. Still, even in these private and confidential meetings with her lawyers, Dorothea couldn't bring herself to acknowledge the truth. She insisted on her innocence, insisting that her patchwork quilt of personal history was the absolute truth, and doubled down on any lie that she was caught in. Eventually, Vlotton and Climo realized that the only way they were going to keep their client out of prison was to keep her off the stand. The whole trial was going to have to proceed without Dorothea speaking up in her own defense. The Sweet Old Lady Act that Dorothea had been using for years was going to be her lawyer's first line of emotional attack on the jury, and with that angle destroyed, they went for the next best thing: character witnesses, and plenty of them. They reached out to everyone in the communities that Dorothea had helped, all of the homeless people who were given a secured home, all of the neighbors who had eaten her tamales or watched her caring for stray cats and stray men alike, the single mothers who had found a way to escape their abusive husbands. Every life that Dorothea had touched was rolled out as a shield in front of her. And the grandest lie of all was built out of it. The ways that Dorothea had spent her ill-gotten gains on charitable work were well documented, so Vlotton and Climo leaned into that as an explanation. Dorothea gave care to people who were close to death every day, and when they did finally expire, she used the money that was due to them to help others. Her statement on the plane became their entire defense. I cashed the checks, but I didn't kill them. Meanwhile, the prosecution had decided to drop the fraud charges related to Dorothea's complex benefit scam. for fear that the jury would get too confused if they had to explain all the ins and outs of the system that were being exploited. The murders were the charges on which Dorothea was indicted, and they were what the prosecution planned to nail her on. It was all or nothing. On the 25th of April, 1990, pretrial hearings began. The court was packed to bursting with the media and members of the public, a massive audience waiting to see if justice would be done. The prosecution launched into their narrative, describing Dorothea as a cold-blooded, calculating murderer who had established her boarding house business to prey on the weak and helpless of society for her own monetary gain. The defense didn't engage with that story, instead putting forward a motion to move the trial. The trial had become a media event, and the coverage that Dorothea had received so far was guaranteed to have prejudiced any jury in the area against her. Judge Gail Ohannesson sat through 2 days of arguments from both sides before finally ruling that a change of venue was acceptable, but that there would be no mistrial on the basis of media coverage. Despite the massive public interest, she had seen no evidence that the trial would violate Dorothea's constitutional rights. Arguments and evidence were presented in the weeks and months that followed, and everything that would later be relied on in the jury trial was presented to the judge, including copious statements from the psychologists whom her lawyers had brought in to interview Dorothea in the vague hope of an insanity defense. Those psychologists argued that Dorothea's childhood and unstable life up until recently could have contributed to her stress levels when residents died in her care. They believed that this might have affected her decision-making, and that the fear of her stable life being torn apart led to her hiding the bodies rather than reporting their deaths. Because of the terms of her parole, it was possible that she had never reported the deaths because it might have led to her being jailed. In the end, 9 counts of murder were filed against her, and the jury trial was set to take place in Monterey. It took many months to find an unbiased jury, and even longer for the many different motions put forward by the defense to be picked apart. They were playing for time. The longer that the jury had to wait, the more likely they would forget details of the media coverage. They did that job well. It was the 9th of February, 1993, before the trial finally began. Both sides presented their same cases as previous, the prosecution arguing that Dorothea was a monster, the defense that she was a saint. 153 different witnesses were called to give evidence. 3,500 pages of reports were offered up. A scale model of the boarding house on F Street was wheeled out into the courtroom. Delay after delay was introduced, making this trial into the longest in California history. On the 15th of July, the jury withdrew to consider the evidence and present their verdict, well aware that the prosecution were seeking the death penalty for the little old lady who was perched behind the bench beside them. Nobody knows exactly what happened in the room where the jurors were gathered, whether there were arguments, confusion, persuasion, or anything else. Those rooms are sealed. But after days of deliberation, a note was passed back to the judge on the 2nd of August. We, the jury, are deadlocked on all 9 counts. We would like further instructions. The defense immediately demanded that this be ruled a mistrial. but Judge Michael J. Verga fended them off, instead telling his jury to go back and try again, after providing them with very clear instructions on how to achieve a decision. It took until the 26th of August before they finally came back with a decision, and even then, it was incomplete. They were still deadlocked on most of the counts, with only 3 that they were willing to convict Dorothea on: the murders of Dorothy Miller and Ben Fink in the first degree, and of Leona Carpenter in the second degree. Dorothea took the news with the same stone-faced acceptance with which she had viewed pictures of her victims, both alive and decomposed, throughout the trial. It was only when the judge handed down her sentence of life without parole that she finally spoke. "I didn't kill anyone." William Clausen, the son of Ruth Monroe, was satisfied when he heard that justice was finally being done, even if his mother's death was never officially treated as a murder. When reporters asked him if he was upset that Dorothea had not received the death penalty, he explained that he was not. There were only 2 ways that Dorothea's life could end now. She would either die in prison or somehow find a way to trick the system and escape. Then he would be waiting for her. Dorothea was sent to the women's prison in Chowchilla, where she lived out the rest of her days in exactly the kind of quiet celebrity that she had always desired. She denied all of her crimes, but relished the attention and respect that she received for having committed them. Everyone in Chowchilla knew who she was and would say hello to her politely. She was 64 years old by the time that she was locked up for the last time, and as the years rolled on, she made her way through all of the different jobs in the prison before age and infirmary finally took that business from her. Towards the end, she would still rise with the dawn to clean her entire shared cell and make use of the $10 monthly donation that she received from an unnamed charity to produce homemade snacks for her cellmates and the guards. When Miss Dorothea was cooking, the whole block livened up, hoping for a taste. Towards the end of her life, she filled more and more of her time with fiction, reading crime thrillers and watching CSI, Criminal Minds, and Cold Case on television, obsessing over fictional murders while still maintaining that she had committed none herself. Whenever services were held in the prison chapel, she would attend, but she avoided formally joining any inmate worship groups for fear of being asked to confess her sins. Religion had been a defining cornerstone of Dorothea's life as a child, with the church providing her with the care and stability that her parents refused to. So it is of no surprise that, in her final days, she turned to God once more. But for forgiveness to be received, guilt first has to be admitted, and Dorothea couldn't tell the truth of what she had done, even until the very end. Her stories, her precious lies that she had worn with such pride and delight, were still wrapped around her like gilded chains to the very last moment of her life. She would never admit to any of her crimes. She wouldn't even admit to having lived her actual life. She still claimed to be receiving mail from celebrities and ex-husbands who had long moved on with their lives and forgotten her name. On March 27th, 2011, at the grand old age of 82, Dorothea died of natural causes in her cell in Chowchilla. The same natural causes that she claimed had taken all of her victims, even up until her final moments on this planet. That is the end of episode 15 of Buried Beneath the Boarding House. And it also ends the entire series. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you are new here and listening to this for the first time, please subscribe so you can go back into the playlist and start from the beginning. Thank you guys so much for being here. I truly appreciate all your support in our series, Crying Me to Sleep. Until next time, good night.